agenda, and it is an amended agenda that we sent out yesterday, so please note that. Would motion get that draft? Yep. Moved by Ankeny and seconded by Polk City. Discussion on the agenda. None. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. It is approved.
Online, I don't think so.
We'll make that awkward pause with people online. And up next, we have the approval of the March meeting minutes.
So moved.
By Urbandale, second by Bondurant. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Up next, the report and discuss our first item. And we're going to invite Addison up to talk about the Transportation Improvement Program amendments.
Morning all. I have 3 proposed amendments to discuss this morning, and the first, there we are, thank you. Fairly straightforward. This is a project sponsored by Polk City. Project is a high trestle trail connection through the city with federal aid as part of the project, TAP funding. The change is a simple project realignment along the rear of a property located at 301 North 3rd Street instead of along the street frontages. A little hard to see, I think, with the PowerPoint, but that change will be here. Putting behind the property rather than along the street frontages. Map will be updated in TPMS. This one's fairly straightforward. We'll get into 2 that require a little more explanation. So the second amendment comes jointly from the cities of Clive and Waukee. They are requesting to reallocate a total of $1.85 million in SDBG funds previously awarded to different phases of improvements along Alice's Road. At present, $1.35 million is scheduled for fiscal year 2026 at the intersection of Alice's Road and Douglas Parkway. Here. And the second project, Waukee's, is from Alice's Road to Berkshire. Sorry, on Alice's Road from Berkshire to Meredith Drive. The change would involve consolidating both awards to fiscal year 2027 for the latter project. And so this adjustment, it aligns better with the phasing and coordination of the corridor improvements. And I think Dylan may be able to speak a bit more to the reasoning.
Yeah, we can speak to this. So the tech committee met earlier today, and in a meeting with Clive last week, they brought this up. So we tried to make this happen quickly for them. The situation they've run into is for that Alice's Road, there's 4 phases, at least so far. For phases 2 and 3, they've been acquiring property over the last several years, and it hasn't been a forced thing. They just said, we're going to be doing this. If you have interest, and want to sell to the city, do that. Now that they are going to let the project, the DOT for Federal Highway has informed them that because they didn't acquire the property through the proper, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but in that way, they're being told that either they cannot use federal funds because of on that property that was acquired, or if they want to use federal funds, they cannot use the property they acquired. So the solution that we've come up with is to just move all the federal funding into phase 4, where they have not acquired property yet at all, and they can follow whatever procedures the Federal Highway wants, thereby allowing the project to move forward. If that makes sense from your understanding. And so we see this as it's a little unusual, but I think this will make the project move forward and make sure everything happens the way it's supposed to happen.
Any questions at the end after the third amendment here? So similarly with projects sponsored by Grimes, the amendment is reallocation of funds from one project to another. The project in question is the South James Street improvements and then the Southeast 37th Street West Gap. Sure, also a little hard to see, but that would be the Southeast 37th West Gap. That would be the South James Street improvements. The change is driven by delays related to right-of-way acquisition. This has triggered additional review requirements. So those couldn't be resolved in time to meet the letting schedule. And so Grimes is proposing reallocating the $500,000 from the delayed project, combining it with the $400,000 to the Southeast 37th Street project. And that would total $900,000 for that 37th Street project. This gives Grimes time to work through the DOT's process, keep their order priorities moving forward. those are the three amendments. Our traditional practice, as I understand it, is to have the funding subcommittee discuss before taking these to the full board. My discussions with Dylan, based on the bylaws and how straightforward these amendments are, we don't necessarily recommend one way or another that the funding subcommittee meet. That's open to discussion here.
Just to elaborate on that, on these projects, typically a TIP amendment doesn't have to go to the funding subcommittee. In situations in the past where we've moved money from one project to another, that is where we've taken it back to the funding subcommittee. Again, as Addison said, to us, these seem pretty straightforward to make the projects move forward. So I guess I defer to this committee. If you think it should go to the funding subcommittee, we can happily do that. We've got time just with the delay and the meetings with the partnership trip. We don't meet until the 22nd. We can probably get a funding subcommittee meeting done by then. At the same time, if everyone seems like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, let's just move forward. We'll do that too. So I open up to discussion there.
I personally think it makes sense, and I'd move all three. So we're just, I just want to confirm, it looks like we're just kind of jockeying stuff around. There's really no, it's a net neutral essentially.
Exactly. It's net neutral, and it also frees up some fiscal capacity because these are moving back in our TIP. So it allows some funds, potentially projects, to move forward in the TIP too. So there's a lot of wins in doing this. It lets the projects happen. It frees up potentially other opportunities for other communities too.
And the only question, Dylan, again, with everything happening, there's no chance of.
No.
Okay. I'd move it.
Yep, so just discussing. Thanks, then.
Oh, it says report and vote on.
Oh,
It says on the agenda, report. So I guess I'll
Some we didn't catch.
I'll retract my move. I'll recommend it.
You're in support.
I'm in
That's
support.
what we need to know.
All right.
all right, thank you, Addison. Up next, Mark, is the Safe Streets for All grant application development.
Okay, so been talking about this for a while. Just a reminder, the NOFO was issued at the end of March. The application is due at the end of June. Overall, the program-wide amount of funding available is $580 million. Our maximum award that we can receive from the federal in federal funds is $25 million. They're anticipating between like 40 and 70 implementation grants. And then the performance period, so how long this would last, somewhere between 12 months and 5 years to complete these projects. And it's going to take about a year to get through the grant agreement if we were to be awarded. So just things to keep in mind, eligible expenses, planning and design for action plans and supplemental planning, infrastructure projects, including design and construction, as long as the construction is being completed in that 5-year period, and then non-construction strategies, including education, policy changes, and post-crash care. So just an overview of what we've put together as a recommendation for projects in our grant. We're looking at 10 construction projects, totaling a federal ask of $19.6 million, with a local match of $4.9 million, and I have slides later to describe. They give a list of the projects and communities. We have 5 studies coming in at $4.8 million in federal ask, and then 1.2 in match, and then 2 education programs for a total of about $350,000. So the way that we're kind of structuring this is that construction projects, the communities would be subrecipients. So the MPO would receive those funds, transfer those funds to the communities. The communities would be responsible for managing the design and construction of the projects. And then the reporting would come back to the MPO, and we would do the reporting to USDOT. For the studies and education components, the MPO would be in the lead. We would procure consultants for the studies so that we just do one big consultant procurement at one time. For all the studies, both in the communities and the regional pieces. And then we would ask that communities provide matching funds for community-specific items, which I can get into in more detail in a minute. So the regional components, we have 5 regional components, low-cost countermeasure projects, which would be construction-related, roadway safety audits, which would be study related. Both of those items would be focused in communities, so we would ask for future matches as projects are identified in each of them. A regional speed study, which would be led by the MPO, and as it says there, we procure a consultant for that. And then TIM training, which is traffic incident management training, and then education and policy enhancements, which we haven't identified yet, but we have a list of countermeasures and ideas for that that's in our plan. So this will just help fund some of those initiatives. So what we're currently having conversations about in structuring this grant application is that we would identify one subrecipient to lead the design and construction of the low-cost regional countermeasures projects. And that would just help coordinate everything region-wide, have one point of contact for design and construction management, and they would work with the communities to get projects implemented. And that would also take that responsibility away from the MPOs, because we aren't engineers, we don't do design work, and we don't manage construction. So it gives it to a community that has that expertise. We would procure one consultant or an on-call consultants for the roadway safety audits. For the $4 million, we're expecting we can get about 40 of those if they're roughly mile-long segments. So having an on-call would allow us to have this pool of consultants that we could go for with multiple projects at a time and just keep cycling through those year over year. And then mention the consultant for the speed study, and then for the TIM training and educational components, those efforts will be led by the MPO. It's less technical elements of planning and design, and more just trying to implement pieces and educate the public.
Question.
Yep.
For my education, what is a speed study?
Speed study. So what we would be doing is looking at existing speed limits and data on where people are traveling at rates higher than the posted speed limit, and then also looking at speed-related crashes, and then try to identify countermeasures and potentially a regional approach to setting safe speed limits or adjusted speed limits.
So give examples where that's happened.
In other
Like
communities.
maybe we went from a 70 to 65 or something. Right.
A good location would be like school zones. Like you could adjust the speed limit down in a school zone or extend the school zone a
I thought they
little
were
bit.
kind of standard national standards. So I'm confused what this is going to tell.
This will tell us from data that we collect from Streetlight where we have speed issues. So we have our posted speed limit, traveling public is traveling this. What's the difference? How is our design potentially encouraging speeding? And then we can identify countermeasures to hopefully reduce those speeds so that we take that safety risk out of the equation. That would be the main component, and then crashes that are speed related would be the same thing. Where we're seeing crashes that are speed related,
We've done this in the past.
Not here. It sounds like the city of Des Moines is preparing to do something similar. They just mentioned in our meeting this morning.
This doesn't cover all the members.
Correct. Yeah, it's essentially just taking a little more in-depth analysis of where do we have speeding problems and what can we do about it? What projects might derive from that?
What kind of full circle, whole city.
Yeah, this is all to implement reach that vision zero that we identified previously.
Yeah, and while I'm on this slide, I had mentioned there's some regional countermeasures projects, and the safety audits would have match that we would determine later. Just want to talk to you that those it'd still be required to do the 20% match on those items because these are community specific. That will end up being community specific projects, but we don't know exactly where all those are going to be identified. We would just ask that as we identify those, the communities would provide that 20% match for whatever construction or study is being done in their community. So it does leave this little gray area. We do have a set number that I'll show you in a minute, but we also have this kind of, $2 million in match that we'll have to come up with from the communities in the region at a future date. We are having conversations about potential ways to calculate. So the list of community projects that we've identified, these were identified based on priority projects that were brought forward by the TTC, the technical committee, as we were developing the project. And then we met with communities over the last 2 weeks to narrow down and have more conversations about these projects and get a better understanding of potentially where roadway safety projects could be completed in their communities. So this is the list that we come up with, and this gets into the local match that we've identified for these projects. So 2 of these are shared. The third one is potentially going to be shared. We need to have a conversation about that based on direction of tech. So I'll just leave this up and I can answer any questions about these projects if you have any.
You want to discuss the differentiation between studies and construction?
Yeah, so studies were identified as projects that are priorities, but aren't going to be ready for construction in the next 5 years. But the goal is to advance them into some level of understanding of, not design, because we can't do design unless we construct it, but get you to a concept and understand the issues at those locations, and hopefully be able to advance the study or the project in the future. Construction projects were identified through conversations, but also looking at recently submitted TAP and SDBG projects and trying to identify where on the corridors that we have safety issues can we complete these projects. And a lot of these costs that we've included here are not the total project costs, but they hopefully fill the gap in getting some of these projects completed. So like Ankeny, for example, or Labor Road and Ankeny Boulevard, the trail underpass, that's a TAP project that has been moved through. And I think the 2 million that we've identified fills the last bit of that gap that's needed to get the funding for that project. So that's kind of how the process was put together as we were moving through conversations. Questions on these? So looking at member community matches, the table on the right shows what the match for each community is currently. Again, there's one project that we need to go back. The city of Pleasant Hill Tech asked to have a conversation with the city of Des Moines about cost sharing on the University Avenue project, and that overlaps their 2 jurisdictions. So we'll have to go back and look at those 2, but all the other ones should stay stable. So for the match, member communities will be responsible for the project specific portion. And then there's that second bullet there that talks about, we also have the regional low cost countermeasures and the roadway safety audits, which we would ask for the match to be brought forward by the communities once those projects are identified in the future. So looking at the timeline, just going over the schedule here, we met with member communities. We're in the process of selecting and narrowing projects, and we feel like we have pretty good direction. Tech approved, recommended approval of this project list to move forward. So the next phase is going into conversations about getting approval from the MPO and member communities and getting commitments for a match, and also having conversations with the DOT because there are several corridors projects on here that are on DOT maintained roadways. And then starting in a couple of weeks, we'll really start hammering out the grant application narrative and components of that so that it can all be completed prior to June 26th. It's important to note, just so that everyone's aware, the only policy meeting between now and June 26th, when the application is due, is the May meeting. The application will be due the 26th, and that's in June, and that's the June policy meeting. So we want to make sure that we have as close to possible our understanding of the projects, the matches, and the recommended language for communities to approve in resolutions and funding commitments prior to that meeting. Any questions?
I do have a question, sorry. How does the money work out in this regional component section as opposed to the overall? So I'm looking at the studies, and there's on this list here, second page. There are 3 studies identified with total 1.2 in federal share. And that correlates with the top box of 1.2. But we also have the regional components that are identified 2 studies at 3.6. So how do those 2 work together in the total?
Let me double check that because probably my spreadsheet just had an error in it.
Oh, okay. Didn't know if the regional components were perhaps separate from.
No, that overview includes everything. So the 3.2 would be federal share, and that goes into the 4.8 in federal share. So for say the roadway safety audits for there.
I got you.
Yep, that 800,000 feeds into.
I was confusing the match in the federal share.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Marcus. Next, we'll welcome Allison back to the podium to talk about public participation plan update and opportunity.
Thank you. Yes, good to see some new faces and old faces as well. So one of the things I'm taking on as I come back to the MPO is updating our public participation plan and learning how to do slides. And so that is going to be kicking off over the next couple of weeks. Already kind of talking internally about our capacities, and then we're going to start going to, especially the tech members, as our city staff that might have needs, and then broadening that out to our agencies that we partner with across the region as well. And there are some, we don't necessarily always do this on a 5-year update, but this is about the time for a 5-year update anyways. And with the guiding principles, the new vision, and a lot of kind of the restructuring of the MPO, good time to kind of hash that stuff out. And then in our USDOT certification review, we did get some comments about tweaks that we could make, so we'll incorporate those as well. And then just want to let you know, there are a couple of public participation opportunities for yourself, your community members, and things like that. So we have 2 Trailside Bikehead Roundtable open houses, where some of the cities and some of our partner organizations like the Avenues and the Street Collective and things like that will go to fun breweries along the trails to have open houses and casual conversations about what's going on currently and in the future with the trail network and things like that. And that'll honestly play into the update of our active transportation plan, which internally we're starting to kick off and we'll continue to roll out. There is a survey out now. So there are these little postcards in front of you that have a QR code that you can go to and fill out that survey. But we also have more if you'd like to take them to your city halls and put them there as well. I don't remember the due date for the survey, but it's open for just a little bit longer. And so one of the things that I'll also plug is that we do invite policy and transportation technical committee members to be part of the planning processes and help lead some of these plans. So if active transportation is a burning desire for you, do reach out to us and we will plug you in those areas. Links directly to the survey are in your packet. I'll take any questions if you might have them.
Next, we have Dylan for fiscal 2026 Unified Plan Work Program.
Thank you. This is here for a final approval. Again, not approving of this committee, but a recommendation, I suppose, to the policy committee. We approved a draft back in March, sent that draft to the Iowa DOT and Federal Highway Administration. They've since reviewed it. We have to have a final back to them by the end of this month. So if you go to the next slide, they did give us comments back last week. They were very, very minor in their comments back to us, so not a lot has changed. A couple of comments, examples, we had board members that needed to be updated, acronyms. They did reach out to us again just the other day. There were a couple of things, and we've talked about this before, from some of the executive orders that came out that we'll need to clean up language. So there was one reference to environmental justice that we've taken out. It only showed up in a glossary, so it didn't affect the actual plan. We tweaked some language about the carbon reduction program too, to take out the word climate change. Little things like that we have since updated that you will see when it's approved by policy. It didn't show up in the, if you click on the link now, it'll still show those, but we'll have that cleaned up by the policy committee meeting. The substance of the draft really did not change though. And on the subsequent pages, we've got the list of projects that we have in there again. One thing I'll point out, if we go to the fourth one, I think, we've talked about this previously. You can see there's a strike through for the passenger rail feasibility study. That was the line that goes basically from downtown out to Grimes. That there was some interest from the railroad in doing something there. It sounds like the railroad has lost interest. So we've just taken that out as far as a project and taken it out as far as our budget. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some updated budget figures. I apologize, it's a little small, but the end result is about the same. We took out $250 or $25,000 for that rail study that we were going to collect, and then we were going to turn right around and spend it. So the end result is about the same. Leaves us with a surplus of about $7,000 at the end of the year. If you go one more slide, you can still see, I've shown this a few times, kind of what our forecast looks like if things continue the way they are. The big caveat to that is probably next year or the year after the reauthorization bill. That'll change. Probably the funding that the MPO receives could tick it up or down, and we'll have to reevaluate this as we go forward. That's what we have as far as the work program. If there's any questions about the budget or the actual activities the MPO will be doing, happy to take them now. Otherwise, you'll see this in a couple of weeks before the policy committee for approval.
All right. Thank you, Dylan. Up next is Gunner with legislative updates.
I would like to ask everyone to knock on wood and call your senators, please. We are very close on Feature 435, closer than we've ever been. Passed through the House a couple weeks ago on a 90-2 vote. And then it is very close in the Senate. It's gone through 2 Senate committees, Commerce as well as Appropriations. Appropriations was just this week. The next step is to get scheduled for debate on the floor. We can see that as early as next week. So it's not there yet, but if we do get a vote in the next few weeks, the final step would be a signature by the governor. I want to pause here and say a really big thank you to all the policymakers who leveraged their relationships, spent time on the phone. Big thanks to Supervisor Holm. He's leveraged a lot of his relationships. I know others of you in the room have done so as well. We put this path in motion several years ago, but really you're delivering on it now, and I just want to say thank you. The next phase, should we be so fortunate, would be to work with our federal delegation on the weight exemption piece. And we've been working closely with Grassley's office to coordinate what that submission process would look like. We have several meetings on the books while we're in DC to talk to not only the USDOT and our congressional delegation. We also have a separate small huddle scheduled with our congressional delegations to talk about what process would look like, what language would look like, etc. I didn't go into much detail in terms of the background of what all this does. I'm assuming you all know that, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you. The end is near.
Maybe it'll come off our agenda.
Well, then we get into study.
Oh, no.
But yes,
A different way.
as far as the legislative pieces, yes.
All right, we'll be moving on to informational items and quickly, quick comment from Dylan. Otherwise, if you guys have questions, we'll discuss it. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, just a couple of things. The financial statement, you will see there's no information yet because today is the first of the month, so we don't have the bank statements and things like that yet. We will have those. The finance subcommittee will review that like normal. You'll have it by the May 22nd meeting. The other thing I wanted to point out on the contracts and expenses, there's a couple of things. One is our contract with Tool. We're asking for an extension to that contract, given the timing of the submission to the USDOT for that application. The application is due after our contract expires, so we just want to extend that contract out to allow time to complete that and get some other things done. Doesn't change the funding level at all for that. No budget changes with that, just the time frame. And then the other one is our contract with Streetlight. This is something that this is our second year of that. To remind everybody, this is data that we collect, or that we don't collect, we subscribe to, but we make it available to all of our communities. So we want to renew that. There's budget for it, but it's a $92,000 cost. So before we sign off on $92,000, we want to make sure everyone's aware of that. This would just continue the process like normal. And we're also asked to get it on a fiscal year basis. I mean, in the month of May, we can just get it on the calendar or the fiscal year going forward. So what those two things out.
So I guess maybe just a question and maybe it's feedback for folks here. The Greater Des Moines Partnership also has a very similar service. I'll give it a place. What's that?
It's called Placer.
Yeah, Placer AI, that's right. I don't, my team tends to gravitate towards that service rather than the streetlight. Now, I'm not, must just be a user preference or something because I think they're very, very similar. So I don't know how the rest of the communities are doing. Are we using streetlight?
They are, and Marcus might have more details on how much and who's all using it. We have looked at Placer. This was a conversation when we decided to go with Streetlight, and they are really two different. They both use cell phone data and things like that, but they are two different purposes. So Placer AI is more for parks and farmers markets and things like that. Streetlight gives us more of the speed data, the route data, and those things. So definitely, they both can be used for transportation, but they are two different animals.
Any other questions on any of the items? Nothing. We can move on to other non-action items of interest of the committee.
I think Gunner's going to embarrass me, so or Marcus.
They don't want me to do this, but here we are. Gunner's making me embarrass him. So I also serve on the Iowa APA board as the vice president, and we selected Dylan, the Iowa's outstanding. Iowa's outstanding chapter volunteer for this last year. Dylan is coming up on the end of his term on the board. He's past president now, but he also served as the legislative chair for a long time. President-elect and the president. So we just thank Dylan for all his support and effort over the years.
All right, congratulations, Dylan. Anything else? All right, we'll know our next meeting is on June 5th at 11:30. Nothing else before us. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Did you get an email from me on Monday?